Thank you very much, Prof. And that brings us to the end of the conversation. We would like now to turn quickly to the question and comment section. And we hope to finish all the questions, hoping the time will allow. First and foremost, we have a comment from Michelle, who says it's yet another pleasure for us to learn from the law guru himself, Professor PLO. Thank you so much, Daktari, for this. Then we have Nana. I think Nana is from Ghana. It is a pleasure to listen to Prof. Ayaga Max, top-notch oratory skills. Then Emoit, have been a lifelong student of Prof. Always refreshing to listen to him and to the continent. The continent is blessed to have you, Professor. Ayaga says, quite on point, Prof. The argument by Kenya in the Somali versus Kenyan case before the International Court of Justice were just lame. Yeah, with much respect to the agents, we could have done better. And then Maranda, I think these are mainly comments. Maranda says, how do you punish corruption in Kenya when history itself indicates that most of the corrupt politicians steal and get away with it? Furthermore, when they are those situations, they politicize such. Then Nana again, Prof, I know that most African countries have passed these laws you're talking about, but the problem is the implementation and enforcement. Yeah, so I think he's in agreement with you. Otieno, Prof, to what extent do the current socioeconomic and political challenges in South Africa reflect the failure or continued relevance of Kwame Nkrumah's vision on Pan-African unity? Implications, I think a continuation by Otieno. What implications do these developments have for Africa's political and economic integration as a continent? So perhaps, Prof, that's the first question so far. You want to deal with it?
Yes, let me deal with it. In fact, I've been engaged in some kind of debate when the question of xenophobia reared its ugly head just a week ago in South Africa. I wrote an open letter to the president of South Africa, Matamela, Cyril Ramaphosa. And my argument was that vigilantism as a way of dealing with undocumented individuals is not the way to go. My letter has elicited quite some rage and support in different areas. And I've just this day responded to 2 letters. One was from a gentleman from Mpumalanga who took the view that my position was not informed by a proper understanding of the situation. And he said, and I quote, that in fact, we South Africans fought apartheid and will also fight the hypocrites who don't understand the situation in Africa. I responded to him and I said, in part, I've read your very angry letter, but you've got to acquaint yourself with history to understand that the struggle against apartheid was mounted by all Africans. And I took him down history. And I also told him that in my view, the most important thing is that South Africa has the right to deal with people who don't comply with the law, but it does not justify the blanket condemnation of all immigrants. And I reminded him that, in fact, some of my friends have told me that I'm wrong in talking about xenophobia, that is actually Afrophobia, because what they are saying is that persons of African descent are the ones who are being attacked, not whites, not Indians. And he's responded to my letter just about 2 hours ago, and I said I look forward to meeting him. My view is that once again, with regard to the question about the socioeconomic realities, who controls industry? Who controls the manufacturing sector? If you look at some of these countries, look at South Africa, population, the white population is no more than 8%, but they control almost 70% of the economy. The same is true in Namibia. The same is true even in Botswana. In Zimbabwe, you've just seen 2 days ago, the Zimbabwean government has said they are returning almost 67 farms that were seized from the white farmers. If you come to Kenya and look at our economy, you look at who controls our economy, Tanzania, the same. So that the socio-economic architecture of the post-colonial African state is still being externally dominated. The only country that is exempt from this, in my view, is Ethiopia, because its architecture did not allow this invasion. So if you look at it, one of the things that we intended to do in the continent of Africa through integration, and look at East African Community 1, and I've written an article about East African community integration. Up to 1977, the East African model was the model that was even copied by the European Union. We had a single currency, we had one education system, one examination, we had East African harbor, East African telecommunication. So in many ways, we were integrated. And after the fast tracking, East African community was supposed to be, we are supposed to have had a one customs union, one currency by 2009. The president ought to have been sworn in 2010. But you can see we are now 16 years later, and we are moving further and further apart in all the critical areas which would have underpinned the East African community. Staff have not been paid in certain cases for 3 months. Very basic things. And if you look at even the manner in which we admit countries, if you go to Europe, for example, if you want to join a REC, you become a candidate. Turkey, for example, has been a candidate for admission in the European Union for 10 years. Here, we admit Somalia, we admit Ethiopia, we admit Sudan. The economies are not at the same level. The net effect is tension. ECOWAS, we have now seen the Sahelian countries of Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali have moved away. SADC, you can see with these xenophobic or Afrophobic activities in South Africa, the relationship with Malawi and Zimbabwe and other neighbors is not doing very well. In the Maghreb, Morocco does not know whether it wants to be part of Africa or not. When it is convenient, it is. So all these factors conjoined tells you that there is work to be done. Yet, you look at Africa Agenda 2063 and Africa Continental Free Trade Area, as Dr. Salah said, we know what we want. We actually shout from the rooftops. But the gulf between declarations and implementation is growing wider and wider. And I believe it is you, the younger generation, who must work at it. And one of the persons that 2 weeks ago, I was in Ghana and having a conversation with President John Dramani Mahama, who I think is beginning in his second coming, as he says, is moving in a direction which ought to be supported and commended. He's saying, number one, we've got to take charge of our economy. We've got to take charge of our affairs. And when we are interacting with other civilizations, as we must define what we want so that the relationship is symbiotic, not parasitic. And I think we must continue raising our voices in this manner. Forums such as this that are being conducted, this is the way. It's not that many of these changes that took place because people did the things that you are doing now, that other people are in places of joy as I speak now, but you are imprisoned here deliberately to share thoughts on critical ideas. I think that we cannot afford the luxury of despair. Let us just go out there. It is Fidel Castro who used to say that keep on knocking, keep on knocking. When you are getting tired, that is when the door is about to give in. And I think that we are in that space.
Thank you, Prof. Nana, once again, Prof, don't you think most African constitutions empower our governments in power? The winner takes it all. I don't know if you want to make a comment on that.
Yeah, I want to make a comment on that. In fact, I hold the view. Nyerere used to say it very well. He said that in Europe and America, you talk about a prime minister or a president being weak. In Africa, by dint of the constitution, Mwalimu said, the African president has the power of the Roman Catholic Pope and the president of the United States put into one. He is a demigod who moves around the country dishing out the thing that he called development. And the people think that he is the holder of the yam and the knife. Achebe speaks about it in his book, A Man of All People, and talks about it once again in The Trouble with Nigeria in 1983. That is why I hold the view that our constitutions must be rethought. When I visit Ghana or Nigeria and I see how the traditional rulers are dealt with, as Nana would know, Nana and Nom, there is something that they represent, which the president does not represent, which the minister does not. What is that thing? The day we distill that thing and put it within the constitution and deploy it for the general good, having removed the negative aspects of that type of leadership, that is the day we are going to have constitutional dispensations which immunize us from the pain that these elections, one of the most painful things in Africa today, I do not know what to substitute them with, are these elections. After every election, almost every African country is under threat of degenerating into chaos. Look at what we saw in Tanzania, what we saw in Uganda, as I said a little earlier, what we saw in Kenya in 2007, 2008. And if you are in Kenya today or you are in Nigeria, you'd think the elections are being held the following week. But the elections are 1 year away because politics has become the avenue for acquisition without work. In fact, if you are a politician, you have won lottery. You now can get things easily. And that, I think, is why African politics is so competitive, this cutthroat competition. And I've said ad nauseum, throats are actually cut. And we should now be bold enough, and I'm involved in a number of initiatives where people are beginning to interrogate this kind of governance. And I hope that these conversations will now begin to be seen at universities in terms of public lectures, at different fora where policymakers are, and that ultimately you'll have a few leaders who are able to be the arrow's head in this kind of debate.